I had a chance to try out the Motion Luba 2 robotic lawnmower. Quite an exciting little device. And in this program, I'm going to give you my review of the product. I've been using it for about a month, so it's still fairly new to me, but I think I've learned a lot about the device. Before I decided to record this, I went online and looked at other YouTube videos that reviewed this product, and I was a bit surprised at those reviews. Most of them are extremely positive. The people think that this is just the greatest machine that's ever been invented, and I suspect a number of the creators of those videos have affiliate links with Motion. That means they make a small commission every time a unit gets sold from their video. To be quite honest with you, I think the device has merit, but my review is not going to be nearly as positive as some of the ones I've seen. If you're thinking of this device, watch my whole video. There are some really key things that you need to understand before you go ahead with the purchase. I'm going to break this into 3 sections. We're going to have a look at the hardware, then we'll have a look at the software, and then we'll review how well the whole device does in mowing your lawn. The Luba 2 comes in various models. First of all, there are 2 sets of models. There's the low cut and the high cut models. The low cut doesn't give you a special designation, but it's only useful for grass that needs to be cut very low. Now, I believe that works well for some warm climate grasses, but it's pretty much useless for cool growing grasses, and that covers most of North America. Most of us are growing things like fiscues and Kentucky bluegrass, and that lawn should be cut higher. So if you are in that group, you really need the H model. The H model covers a range of 2.2 to 4 inches, and you really want to run the device at the higher end of that. At least 3 inches, and 3.5 inches is even better. If you cut your lawn with longer grass, it is affected less by drought, and you'll have a much healthier lawn with less weeds. Now, it maybe doesn't look as good as one that's cut very short, but it's a much healthier lawn, and it takes much less maintenance to keep the weeds out. Once you've made that decision, you also have to pick the size of the machine you're going to get. And they come in 0.25 acres, 0.75 acres, 1.25 acres, and 2.5 acres. When I first looked at this device, I figured, well, that's just an approximate range, right? That kind of gives you an idea which model to get. I assumed that you could get a smaller model and just run it longer. I mean, that works. I mean, I cut my lawn maybe once a week, so if I got a smaller unit, which is less expensive, I could simply run it for a longer period of time and it would still cut my grass. Well, that doesn't seem to be true. According to the manual, the size of the unit and the associated software with that unit limits how much grass you can cut. So if you buy the unit for 0.75 acre, you can't cut 1 acre of grass. Now, I find that really surprising, so I may be wrong on that point, but that's what the manual says. So the first thing to do is make sure you know how much grass you have. When I ordered my unit, I just guessed at how big the grass area was, but I should have been a little more careful and measured it more accurately. All right, what about the assembly of this unit? I kind of expected it to come as one unit, but in fact, you do have to do some assembly. The optical system has to be attached to the top of the unit, and the bumper has to be attached. Now, neither of those are particularly difficult, but it does take time to do that. Now, on the website, it says that this unit takes 18 minutes to set up. That's a complete lie. You're probably going to spend 18 minutes just putting this unit together. And then there's still the station for charging it. And there's things there that have to be assembled. And to be honest, the manual's not very good with the instructions for assembling the charging station. There's a bunch of different wires that have to be plugged together the correct way. There's 2 power supplies, and you only need one of those, but it doesn't really explain which one to use. So you kind of have to start plugging things together and see if they fit. Now, it has been designed well in that you can't make a mistake in doing that. You just pick pieces and see if they go together until you get it right. But it takes about an hour and a half to assemble the whole thing. The whole system has three main components. There's the lawnmower itself, that's the Luba 2. Then there's a charging station. That's where the Luba goes to rest, and that's where it goes when there's nothing to cut, and it's also where it gets charged up. Attached to that charging station is a pole with a round disc at the top, and that's called the RTK. That RTK communicates with satellites and then communicates to the Luba 2 to tell it where it is in your lawn. So the place you put this is important. The RTK should not be put near a house. It needs to be put away from the house so it gets proper signals from satellites and so that it can communicate with the Luba 2 as it's cutting your lawn. The other thing to note is that the RTK also needs power. So you need to find a place where you have an outlet and it's not near the house. Now that's a bit of a problem for most people. Now some people put it out near the deck, but you have to have a location where this works. Now the charging station should also not be covered. So you can't put it inside, or you can't put it inside a shed or underneath a shed or something like that. It has to be out in the open so that the Luba 2 can communicate with the RTK. In my case, I don't have any place around the house where I have this combination of requirements. Wherever I have outlets, I don't have space for the charging station. And where I have space for the charging station, I don't have an outlet. Now luckily I do have power out in the middle of the garden, and so that's where I put my system. It's a little bit a ways from the house, but not very far. It's certainly within the specs of the system. But that did cause me some problems, as you'll see later on in this review. The other thing to keep in mind is that the Luba 2 also needs to communicate with Wi-Fi, and you need to be able to program the Luba 2, and that is generally done on a cell phone or some sort of computing device, and that computing device needs Wi-Fi. And so here's the problem I ran into. When I'm in the yard near the RTK, my Wi-Fi signal is too weak to communicate to the house, too far away. So a lot of things in the app aren't working. The app also has to communicate with Bluetooth to the device, and then the RTK communicates with satellite. So you've got three different electronic communications going on, and if any of those fail, you're out of luck. You'll see what problems this caused for me in a moment. All right, so let's have a closer look at the hardware, the lawnmower itself. It has a really nice design. It's a nice, sleek unit, and just looking at it, it looks like it's been engineered quite well. It's got really rugged wheels. It has a suspension system which looks really good. It's designed to be waterproof so it can be out in the rain and won't get damaged. The bumper at the front is quite sensitive, so that works quite well. It has four-wheel drive, so it can change directions in a fairly small space. The manufacturer claims to have zero-turn technology, and it may have that, but it doesn't seem to use that when the machine is out in the lawn. And I'll show you what it does in a minute. It also has front wheels that are omni wheels. They have little spinning parts in the wheels to allow it to turn, to give it that 0-degree turning. And that works reasonably well, but I noticed that when it was on the lawn, it doesn't actually get enough friction to turn well. Eventually it does get there though. So overall, I think the design of the unit is quite good. When it's running, it's extremely quiet. I mean, you have to stand pretty close to hear it. Your neighbors aren't going to complain about the noise, that's for sure. Now what about the cutting blades? Unlike a regular lawnmower that has these blades that spin around, what they do here is they have two discs, and the discs are spinning. And attached to each disc are small metal bars. They're just screwed in. And they're loose enough so that they can move. So if it hits something, they'll just spin around and it's unlikely you'll damage them very much. But if you look at these blades, they're quite small. So at any given time, there's very little grass that's actually being cut. Now, one of the other reviewers mentioned that you need to replace these blades every couple months. So that's a replacement cost, and you need time to do that. In fact, they discuss in detail how they tend to get clogged, and every once in a while you have to turn the machine over and clear out the clogged grass in these. They seem to do a fairly good job cutting the grass, but keep in mind that this adds maintenance to the lawnmower. Compared to my riding lawnmower, I haven't changed the blades in 10 years. They get sharpened once in a while, but that's only every 3-4 years. I do have some issues with the actual controls on the unit. For instance, there's an on-off switch, and it's a pressure switch, so you actually have to press it down and hold it, and then when you let go, the machine is on. The only problem is there's no indication of when it's on. So if you walk up to the unit, you don't know if it's on or off. If you press this button and you hold it for a short period of time, you think it's on, but it's really not on, but you can't tell. There's two other buttons. One is a home button and one is a start button, and they're done the same way. You really don't know when you've pressed them and when you haven't pressed them, and I found that very confusing.
All right, so we'll go home and start. Now go on.
Yeah, it might have been too long.
Home and start.
Start recharging. Start charging. Start charging.
It's not straight in there. That's why. It's a little straighter this time.
Start charging.
There we go. Now it's found its home.
I discussed the height setting on this machine, and in my case I got the H model because I want to cut my grass higher. There's no way on the machine to actually set the height. You have to do that through software. That doesn't sound like a big deal, but the problem is that when you upgrade the software, you have to reprogram the height. And upgrading software happens more than you think. So that means you have to constantly remember to set the right height. Now, on my riding lawnmower, I set it once and use the same setting for 10 years. I don't have to worry about it all the time. But in the Luba, you constantly have to reset this. That makes no sense to me. If it's programmed correctly, the software would download that value onto the machine, and once it's on the machine, it would simply get that value every time you change the software. Or much better still is to make it a hardware setting. You don't need to do this in software. I don't want to change my height every week. I set it and leave it. Another neat little feature that the Luba has is a rain sensor. So assume it's out in the lawn cutting away and suddenly it starts to rain. It senses that rain, goes back to its charging station, and waits there until it's dry again. So I thought I'd test this. So we had Luba running its little track, and I took out the hose and it suddenly rained. And sure enough, Luba stopped working and went home. So that part worked really well. Now the way this works is that it has a sensor at the top of the machine, and there's a little depression on the shell with two metal pins sticking up, and I assume it's measuring the conductance across those pins. And when there's water in the well, electricity travels across the pins and it knows it's wet and it shuts off. When it's dry, there's no electricity crossing it, and so there's no rain. The sensor works fairly well when rain starts. It doesn't work quite so well when rain stops. So it does take quite a while for this well to dry up. And until it does, the Luba won't go out and do any more work. In fact, when we were doing our testing, we didn't want to wait for hours and hours until it dries out, so we actually had to take a cloth and dry it up. But the nice thing is that Luba won't run in the rain, so it's protected in its charging station, and it's not trying to cut wet grass, which is much more difficult to cut. So it is a nice feature to have. Alright, so that's hardware. Let's talk about the software. This system is actually fairly complicated. You've got satellite communication with the RTK. You have Bluetooth communication between your cell phone and either the Luba or the RTK, I'm not sure which. You have an app running on your phone. It needs to connect to Wi-Fi. This whole system is really complicated for cutting your grass. So the first thing you do is you log into the manufacturer and you download the app. In order to do that, you have to give it your email and the password, and they send you a registration code. The only problem, that didn't work. I tried it several times and finally contacted support, and what support said was that I needed to use a Gmail email address. They wanted me to set up a new email address just so I can download and register their app. Now that's ridiculous. Any email should work. Now I do have a Gmail account and I did have a Gmail to use, but I never look at it. So now if the manufacturer sends me any kind of notice, I won't get it because I never look at it. You have to be able to use your own email to register these things. Anyways, I used my Gmail. We finally got it registered. I took it out, stood beside the Luba and tried to do some stuff. Nothing worked. Couldn't make it go home, couldn't make it drive. Nothing worked. The reason nothing worked was that I had actually registered a week earlier. And by the time I went out to actually use it, there was a new version of the app available. And I had to download that. Without downloading the latest version, nothing seems to work on the unit. And in fact, we've been using it for about a month now, and we've had to download the app 3 times. Now, that's not a big deal in itself, but every time you download the app, it seems to forget the settings you had from before. That's just really bad software design. And I know about software design because I ran my own software company for 25 years. First of all, I shouldn't be forced into downloading the new version. I should be able to use the old version. In fact, I should be able to use that for years. And if I am forced to download a new version because of some major change, it certainly should be saving all of my previous settings. I should be able to download the new version and just have it run automatically. That doesn't happen with this. The software here needs a lot of work before it's ready for field work, in my opinion. The other problem we ran into is that the Luba and the charging station are out in the lawn, and you need to have your phone close to it to communicate. But to get a new app, I need my phone close to the house where I have a good Wi-Fi reception. You can see the problem here. When I'm at the Luba, it doesn't work, and when I'm in the house, it doesn't work because the Luba's over there. So every time we download the app, we actually have to carry the Luba to the house, get it close to the Wi-Fi, do all the downloading, register it again, set up the Luba again, and then we can take it out in the lawn and start programming it. Anyways, we did finally get the system working, and we got the app working with the Luba, and we were able to start programming it. Alright, so let's test the Luba and see how well it does. Now, the one great thing about the Luba is that there's no wires to tell it where to cut. This is all done by positioning satellites and knowing where on your lawn it is. But in order for that to work, you first have to program it. So what you do is you basically take the Luba, put it on the lawn, and using the software, you move it along the edge of your lawn. And that tells it where the edge is. And then everything inside is grass and needs to be cut. The other thing you do is you define exclusion zones. So areas around a tree, for instance, you don't want the tree mowed every week. So you have to identify that area as an exclusion zone. So that's an area that the Luba won't cut. So what I decided to do was I got my grandson to help me. I mean, he's really good with these devices and with programming. His fingers just go so fast on these devices. So he came out to help me, and I had him program the Luba. And we decided to do a smaller test run. So we made an artificial lawn in the center of our lawn, and then we made an artificial exclusion zone. And one of the reasons I did it this way is because I don't actually have exclusion zones on my lawn. So we put an artificial wood structure in the middle that he uses for baseball, and then we made this area around it and essentially made a donut in our lawn. And we wanted Luba to mow the donut and leave the hole alone. The hole is the exclusion zone. And that actually went fairly well. He drove Luba around, showed it where the perimeter of these areas were, seemed to work really great. And then we said, okay, start mowing that lawn. And it started going and went around the exclusion zone. It actually seemed to be doing a good job. Then I threw a little wrinkle into the test. I stood in front of the pathway of the Luba just to see what would happen. Well, the Luba ran into my leg and stopped, which is a good thing. It should do that. Now, the one thing that surprised me was that this device has an optical system, so it should have been able to see my leg before it bumped into it, but that didn't seem to be working. I'm not sure why. Maybe that has to be turned on in a special way in the software. Not sure. Anyways, bumped me, stopped, moved back, and started cutting the lawn again. So that part worked really well. After a few minutes, it was finished cutting, or at least it thought it was finished. Turns out it only cut about 2/3 of the donut. All of the area that was behind my leg, it ignored completely. For some reason, it assumed that my leg was permanent and that it shouldn't cut the grass behind it, but actually missed a big part of the lawn. So there's something still wrong in the software. It's not correcting itself. What I would have expected is that it comes up, bumps the object, moves away, uses its optical sensors to see that, oh, the object has moved out of the way and now I'm able to cut the lawn. Or even if it thought that the leg was still there, it could have went around the other side and cut behind the leg, but didn't do that. It just ignored all of the area behind the leg and to the side of the leg and so on. So there's a whole section of that donut it never cut. Now you might be thinking, well, the leg's not normally going to be there, so that's not a very realistic test. But my grandson plays baseball on this lawn, and he might have left a bat there, or some garden object. So there's always stuff being left on the lawn. If it bumps into something, it needs to cut the rest of the lawn. It can't skip part of the job. So I think it was a valid test. So how precise is this mapping? Well, the specs say that it can cut the lawn within 1 to 2 inches of where it's told to cut. That's pretty good. But then in another part of the manual, it says that when you're setting up the perimeters of your lawn, you should stay 6 inches away from the edge, particularly if that edge has any kind of concrete edge, like a curb, for instance, or some brickwork at the edge of the lawn. Stay away 6 inches. So it's not actually cutting to plus or minus 1 or 2 inches, it's cutting to plus or minus 6 inches. If we turn the unit upside down, you can see where the cutting blades are. Now, when you're training it along the edge of a lawn, you have to use the wheels running along the edge of the lawn. But you can see the actual cutting blades aren't near where the wheels are. They're several inches away and inside. So even if the wheels run along the edge of the lawn, it's still not going to cut to the edge. In the test that we did, I don't think it's accurate to 1 or 2 inches, but it's fairly accurate to where you direct it. But no matter how you direct it and how careful you are, you're going to miss the edge of your lawn, particularly in right angle corners where it has a real hard time in cutting there. So you're going to have to now go and trim that lawn. So let's test to see how precise it is. So I got Lucas to run a new test. We defined a rectangular area of the lawn, and then we asked Luba to cut inside that area. This time there were no exclusion areas. It was a pretty straightforward cut. Now when you watch Luba coming along, you can direct it fairly well, but it's really hard to get it right at the edge of the lawn. But we got pretty close, and then we let Luba cut the lawn. Now as you can see, it does a fairly good job hugging the edge of the lawn, but at some points it seems to fall off the lawn and go into the garden. We redid this test a couple of times, and it seemed to always fail underneath this shrub. So we have this lilac that has a few branches that are sticking out over top of the edge of the lawn, and I think it had trouble getting the right signals, and so it just veered off and started going into the lawn. And that can be a problem with Luba. It needs access above it so it gets the right signals. It also had a problem when it got to the corner. It seems to have a real hard time cutting in the corner. And in fact, in our case, it just kept running into the garden. Then it would back up and run in again and eventually turn itself 90 degrees to go in the other direction. It doesn't handle corners very well. The straight cuts it does fine. So what about the claim that it can cut within 1 or 2 inches of where you want it to cut? Well, those really aren't true. There are a couple of issues here. One is if we turn the Luba upside down and have a look at where the cutting blades are, you'll see that the edge of the cutting blades are inside of where the wheels are. So even if the wheels are right at the edge of your lawn, it will never cut that close to the edge. There's always going to be a strip of uncut lawn. Now, if we add those couple inches onto the 6 inches that they recommend to stay away from the edge, we've now got 6 to 8 inches of lawn, plus the corners. Now, how does that compare to a riding lawnmower? Well, I've designed all of my beds so that there's curves everywhere, and I can mow the whole lawn with the lawnmower. I never have to use a string trimmer. If we look at a regular riding lawnmower, the cutting blades extend out past the wheels. So they're able to cut the edge even though the wheels are still sitting on the grass. The Luba is designed the opposite way, so it will always leave an uncut edge. What that means is that even though it saves you time on cutting the lawn, you now have to take time to use a string trimmer to clean up all the edges. Whereas with my riding lawnmower, I don't have to do that. I never use a string trimmer because I've designed the garden so that my riding lawnmower can do all the edging for me. Now, what about the quality of the cut? That's important too. If you're cutting tall grass, some grass that hasn't been cut in a while, the Luba doesn't do a great job. Now, you can recut it over and over again, and once the grass is cut to a lower size, it will maintain that and give you a nice looking cut. So that's not a big deal. The Luba has all kinds of software settings for different directions of cuts. So you can cut in one direction one week and a different direction another week, and that is a little better for your lawn, but quite honestly, I've never bothered doing that. I just want my lawn cut. And quite honestly, when I'm finished cutting it, I can't see the lines anyway. So I don't really see that being a big advantage, although I do know that lawn guys like those lines. They like to see them. All right, well, let's summarize some of the things that we've found out. What are the pros of this device? Well, it does save you time because it's going to cut the lawn while you're doing something else. It's not going to save as much time as you think because you've got to trim all the edges. But if you have a large lawn that's mostly a rectangular shape, it will save you a fair amount of time. If you have a lawn that's relatively small with a lot of beds and shapes and designs in it, it's not going to save you that much time. Once it's set up, it seems to run quite well. So what are the cons? Well, I found the software very difficult to use, much more complicated than it needs to be. I just want to cut the lawn. I don't want to become a software engineer. In my opinion, the app needs a lot of work. It's the weak point of this device. I think the lawnmower itself is quite well designed and quite a nice piece of machinery. The software is letting it down. There's a couple things that need to happen with that software. One, ideally you simplify it or have two versions. One is complicated with all kinds of bells and whistles, and then the other one is just for the people who want to mow their lawn. But more importantly, when it needs an upgrade, the old version has to work. The upgrade has to be an option. You can't force that on people. And if you do force it on people, at a very minimum, it has to remember all the old settings, and the new version has to work with the old data it has. I don't want to reprogram this every time the manufacturer thinks they should have a software update. Would I use this machine? Quite honestly, I wouldn't. I have a riding lawnmower, which I need anyways to move things around the garden, so I can't get rid of it. I now have two lawnmowers. The Luba is not saving me a lot of time. I'd rather sit on my riding lawnmower and cut my lawn and take 20 minutes to do it rather than 10 minutes trimming the edge and having to worry about Luba. I think that if you have a very large lawn where you're spending hours cutting it, the Luba might be a good choice. And those type of lawns are generally easy to cut because they're kind of straight, and the Luba will just run back and forth and won't have many issues. The bottom line is, I don't think I'm ready for this kind of machine. When I cut a lawn, I want something simple. Even my riding lawnmower is too complicated, but I don't have to worry about an app for it. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this review. I put together some videos for you about other projects that you can do in the garden, things that you can build for the garden, and the link for that is right here. Happy gardening.